We're supposed to love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, and strength. We've got to employ these things. No one would think of investing in a business just because of a nice emotional video. You'd look at the financials. You'd ask tough questions. So I want Christians to be more generous. I don't want people to stop giving, but I want them to be more discerning about what we support.
Hey, thanks for checking out Word Made Digital podcast on YouTube. My name is Joanna LaFleur. I'm the host of Word Made Digital, and this season, season 6, is all about the fruit of the Spirit. We're looking at what is the character behind the things that we do as creatives and communicators and leaders in ministry. So, thank you so much to Compassion Canada and to waybase.com for making this whole season possible. I want you to check out who they are in the links below. But for now, enjoy this video, enjoy this episode, and after you're done, check out tutorials, videos, podcasts, all the other stuff that we have as resources here on YouTube. Krish Kandiah, welcome to Word Made Digital. I'm really honored to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks, Joanna. Lovely to meet you again.
So let's jump in by you explaining a little bit about what you do, particularly because if people did know you from something else, they may not know what you're up to right now.
Sure. So up until December 2020, I was the founder and director of a charity called Home for Good, which was trying to inspire people to consider fostering and adoption, and particularly speaking to churches about our role of obeying what God has to say of his priorities, which is to care for widows and orphans in their distress. That's what we're told is true religion. And so let's call the church to enact that in today's world. And then from December, I started a role with the British government, advising them on adoption and what you might call kinship care. How do we help aunties and uncles and grandparents to look after children that can no longer live with their birth parents?
Wow. I mean, maybe the most obvious question to follow that up with is why? There's lots of ways, if the theme of this conversation is around the idea of goodness, there's lots of ways for you to do good, but why is this the focus of your life's work? What's the background in that for you?
So it's sometimes easier to understand things in life looking back than forward. I'd love to tell you I had a really clear calling to all the different aspects of what I've ended up doing in life. But looking back, I think the golden thread of my life story has been hospitality. So that can start with what was happening in my family. My mother came to the UK having grown up in an orphanage in India, and love to talk to you about orphanages and institutional homes. I hope we're going to have a chance to talk about that today. But she grew up in an orphanage in India and then was discovered by an auntie and brought to the United Kingdom. And she then trained to be a nurse as a teenager. And she was a brown woman in a very white part of the world in the 1950s. And people didn't want her to touch them. The patients would say, "Oh, can you bring me a white nurse?"
Wow.
And she faced all sorts of abuse and racism and xenophobia. But my mother launched a one-woman resistance campaign. And that was to open her home on a Friday evening, cook up a massive vat of curry and rice, and anyone who'd felt they didn't fit in was welcome into my mother's home. And that's how she met my dad. My dad was an international student from Malaysia, and it was in one of those kind of big meetings where food was flowing, that they got to know each other. And so all through my life, all through my childhood, my mother was welcoming strangers. And, I became a Christian in my teenage years, and, I was involved in student ministry, and actually hospitality wasn't an important part of my discipleship. It was something I was picking up from home more than I was picking up from church. We heard a lot about evangelism and giving and praying, but actually, according to the scriptures, hospitality is one of the defining features of what it means to be a follower of Christ. One of the most scary parables, and I did a little series with Danielle Strickland looking at Matthew 25. Jesus said, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me in." And actually our response to Jesus as he comes to us through the poor and the needy and the hungry and the outsider is determinant of whether we're included in the family of God or not. Matthew 25 is the scariest parable because it actually talks about depart from me to eternal punishment. Those of you
Wow.
that didn't
Yeah.
welcome the stranger, feed the hungry, or give something to drink to the thirsty. So, you couldn't get a clearer depiction of what God's looking for as evidence of real saving faith. It's how we respond to those that are in need. And so that's my journey now. And I'd love to tell you it was a deliberate plan. I can definitely see God's hand looking back, that now I'm trying to say, okay, I can influence churches to do that. That's important. But actually, what can I do to help as many children as possible in the UK and globally to find loving, safe homes? And if that means I need to access the political realm, then I'll have a go.
So let's talk about that too, because in a Canadian context where I am, our political systems are similar in because ours is
Mm.
copied from yours. But
I'm sorry
it
about that.
would,
All the flaws are the UK's.
well, yeah, pros and cons, but it would be a negative thing in our country, in our context, to have such an overt Christian approach. I mean, your content, your journalistic writing, your social media posts. There's a lot of Christian, or just simply the fact that you preach and teach in churches. So, can you help us understand how that maybe give us how does that play out in political systems of the UK? Is that an issue there? Do you have to start hiding that a little
Sure.
bit more?
I'm a huge fan of Canada, and I go there as often as possible. I'm an adjunct faculty at Regent College in Vancouver, so huge fan of Canada. But I don't. A lot of Canadians think that Canada's more secularized or more hostile to Christians than the UK. I don't think that's the case. I think we
Hmm.
both have our challenges, and to be honest, my work with the government, they're not phoning me up and saying, "Oh, look, we were looking for a Christian that we could employ. You fit the bill." No, it was our charity was finding solutions to government problems, and they
Right.
kind of didn't care if we were Christian or not.
That
We
was
had
the
this
that
whole range
was
of
yeah.
issues. If we can
Right. That's
demonstrate
interesting.
what we can help. See, I see there are different ways that you can engage politically. So one is got a great biblical president, John the Baptist. He is shouting at King Herod outside the palace, telling him off that he's sleeping with the wrong woman, and that was the right thing to do. That totally John the Baptist is a model, and many Christians think that's the only model of engagement, that you just shout at the
Hmm.
government and tell them off. But Daniel was working inside the tent. It wasn't his choice. He was a trafficked person, enslaved person. But Daniel, think about what he said. "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, may you live forever. I wish this prophecy was for your enemies." You go, "Oh, okay, Daniel, that's a really despotic leader that you're engaging with, but you're still being gracious and you're still trying to problem solve." Same with Joseph and Pharaoh. That wasn't a Christian friendly or a Jewish friendly environment.
Hmm.
He was delivering, and because he delivered, he was able to work graciously in house, finding common ground, and that's how many Christians are working in their workplaces. They might be civil servants, they might be business leaders. They're finding common ground in order to do the most amount of good they can. And for some of us, that's a calling into paid clerical, ecclesiastical work. For others of us, it's a calling to go and do that in the public square. And both of those are equally valid. It's whatever God's calling you to do, right?
Right. I mean, and I hear you saying in some ways it's pragmatism for leaders. If the good work is being done by Christians, great. Let them in. They've got a solution to this big problem we have. Let them do it. But you talk about this Matthew 25 text, what it looks like to be a Christian, or it looks like to be someone that God welcomes into his kingdom. What do you think what we in the West, I mean, this isn't true around the world, but it feels like in some ways we've lost the plot. Um, what do you think about that? Why do you think we've gone maybe in a sort of a different way? I mean, the church is in decline. Churches are becoming apartment built, houses being turned into other kinds of things. There's lots of reasons for that, in terms of the buildings themselves, but
Sure.
Christianity in decline. We seem to have lost some of the point of this Matthew 25? Where do you think we've done that, or how do we get back?
So I'm old school. I think some of the challenge has been the way we have disengaged from biblical Christianity. So are we more influenced by the Bible's vision, God's vision through Scripture for how we live our lives, or are we more influenced by the cultural norms that we're in? So, for example, look, in Britain, we have this phrase, an Englishman's home is his castle. And that's how many Brits live, right? We come home from work, we lock the door, the big bad world, we want to seal that out of our lives. This is my space, this is for me, this is a place of oasis and safety from the horrible things around the world. Now, that's a cultural standard, and it shapes the way that many Christians live their lives. But is it a biblical one? I think as you look at Scripture, and you know, I wrote a book about this a few years ago called God is Stranger, and IVP
Yes.
in the US published it. It's basically my theology of hospitality. And if you look at the Scriptures, you know, starting with, you know, God's hospitality to us in creation, you know, making space for us, and then exiling us from Him when we fail to, you know, live by God's standards. But Abraham welcoming three strangers, Lot welcoming strangers in the middle of the night, and, you know, even offering his daughters up as some kind of substitute for sex abuse. I mean, all sorts of really interesting stuff that we dig into in the book. Please buy it and enjoy it. But all the way through to Matthew 25 and then on to Revelation, you know, Jesus knocking at the door, asking us, you know, humbly asking to come into to our house. That this theme of hospitality is all the way through. We are not to see our homes as castles. We are to see our homes as hospitals. We're supposed to welcome the hungry, the thirsty, the needy, not just into our programs in a church building that we visit once a month and tick the justice box. We're supposed to welcome people into our lives, into our homes, into our kitchen table, around the dinner table. We're supposed to share life with people. And you can see that in Jesus. Jesus welcomed all the wrong kinds of people. That was part of the reason the Pharisees were so angry at him. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. You know, it wasn't just Jesus ran a relief program. He was spending personal time with people. And I think some of that is because we've allowed our culture to shape our reading of Scripture rather than letting our reading of Scripture shape the way that we engage with culture.
Yes. There's so much there. That idea of hospital versus having our homes as hospitals for people, having them as places of welcome. I love that. I mean, I know you do that literally in your own home. You have foster kids that come and go from your home over many years. But can we talk about, because you said you want to get here, let's talk about the institution. So in
Yeah.
contrast maybe to hospitality, in our own homes, there's also these institutions.
Yeah.
For a lot of people maybe don't have a full understanding. In the old days, children went to orphanages. There's lots of Oliver
Yeah.
Twist kinds of stories
Yeah.
about it. And in Canada, we have residential schools, and like recently in the news has come up, not as orphanages, but as places we sent children who quote unquote were a problem. So talk to me about the institutions and what's working, what's not. They're still used in many places around the world.
They are. So there's a whole bunch of really important threads that we need to explore, and it sounds like a podcast series in itself. Maybe we should make that one
Let's do
together
it.
at some stage, Joanna. So there are issues around class and privilege. So some of the early orphanages run by Christians, even in the United Kingdom, there was a big one in Bristol, run by a very famous Christian who inspired me as a young person, George Muller. Maybe you know that name. He inspired a guy called Hudson Taylor to start the faith missions movement. That he'd never asked for money, and then God would just kind of provide it. So George Muller ran an orphanage in Bristol that had 3,000 children in it. And you go, whoa, what's happened? Has there been bubonic plague? Has there been a fire? Why are 3,000 children in
3,000
Bristol
children.
not living with their mums and dads? And the answer is poverty. These families were poor, and so George Muller starts an orphanage in order to be able to educate and clothe and feed these children. And by the way, once we've got them there, we can also share the Bible with them. Why didn't we support their families? They all had mums and dads and aunties and uncles and grandparents. Why didn't we support their families to look after their children? Do you know why? We thought we'd do a better job. We thought we, the church, would do a better job of caring for these children and their families. And some of that was based on class. We just didn't trust poor people. Now, we took that model to the rest of the world. And so Christians started orphanages, I think well-intentioned. I don't think it was a deliberate intent to try and hurt people, but there was a whole bunch of cultural assumptions that went with us. So we went to Ghana and Kenya and Nigeria and, South America too. We did it in Brazil. We did it in Mexico. And we thought, you know what, we Christians know how to look after these people's children better than they do. So let's set up these orphanages, remove children from their families, and we'll do a good, we'll clothe and feed and help them. So it sounds good, but you're breaking a family bond in doing so, because we think...
Right. It wasn't that it's not for each child that their parents or their aunties and uncles were are not around. It's not that they were truly orphaned, and when we think
No,
of everyone's dead.
the stats are
Yeah.
still true today. There are about 5.1 million children in orphanages around the world. Vast majority of them have aunties and uncles and grandparents and living parents. My mother was in an orphanage, not because her mother died, but she was the wrong race. My mother was a mixed race marriage, a white dad, brown mum, and she was socially unacceptable to both groups. So they put her in an orphanage.
Wow.
So most children in the world do not need to be in orphanages. They need to be reunified with their mums and dads. Think of Madonna. Do you remember Madonna adopted a boy from Malawi? That sounds lovely, but she met his dad. So why does he need adopting if he's got a dad? Can't you support the family to get the help that they need in order that these families can be kept together? Now you're going, Krish, you do fostering and adoption. What are you talking about? Well, the kids that are in care in America, in Canada, in the UK, their family bonds have broken down. Not because Christians got involved, right? Not because we removed them, but because of neglect, abuse, and therefore these children can no longer live with their birth families and they need new families. All the families need rehabilitation. Both are important. But in the orphanage industry, these children don't need to be there at all. They need to be in families. And those that don't, and it's a tiny small minority that don't have any living relatives, that's when I think we need to do local fostering and adoption. So what happened in Canada with the institutional schools, where we thought, and sadly we Christians, and from all sorts of denominations, not just the Catholic Church, we did a deal with the government and said, you know what? We want to find a way to help these kids become Christians. We don't trust their indigenous background or their Aboriginal background, and so we will remove them. And Christians, sadly, had again bought into the cultural mindset that Aboriginal and Indigenous people were somehow lesser and therefore couldn't be trusted to raise their kids. And so then you get this horrible phrase, preserve the man, kill the Indian. Could we get rid of the Indigenous culture by literally removing children from their families and then putting them hundreds of miles away? And some of those children died. That's why you found so many bodies. And they didn't even bother to tell the parents that the children had died.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of repenting that we need to do, not just in Canada and in Australia and in New Zealand where those same things have happened, but actually we, the church, have been continuing to this very day to promote orphanages as a means of helping children when actually orphanages are damaging children. And so something well-intentioned but really not thought through is actually causing more harm than good.
Wow. You have said at the beginning of this interview this idea of your own journey, the hindsight, that when you look back, you can see more clearly how you've ended up with this as a life work. In the same way, we can look back in the church very easily we don't have to go more than a year, let alone, the last century or two, some of these systemic things the church has done. When we talk about doing good, in the moment, we think we are. But it's not until we look back and say, oh my goodness, literally, oh
That's right.
God, help
It's
us.
not
We
enough.
did very bad
That's
things.
right. Joanna, what I say, it's not enough to be well-intentioned. We've got to be well-informed.
Right.
Those, people often, when they're thinking about doing good, they think with their heart. Think about how some of the international charities, Christian and otherwise, raise money. They do it through your heart. They show you a beautiful video with a really emotional soundtrack. They don't want you to think through, what's the development model? What's the impact on children? What's the impact on family? What's the theology that's driving this? They want you to short circuit your brain and just engage your heart. Well, actually, that's really bad stewardship. We're supposed to love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, and strength. We've got to employ these things. No one would think of investing in a business just because of a nice emotional video. You'd look at the financials. You'd ask tough questions. So I want Christians to be more generous. I don't want people to stop giving, but I want them to be more discerning about what we support. I've met so many people that have been supporting orphanages run by amateurs. We just came back from an overseas trip. We met these kids and we decided to start an orphanage. And going, well, what do you know about the culture? What do you know about the family systems? What do you know about child protection? What do you know about any of those things? We wouldn't let you run those kind of institutions in our nation because you're not qualified. Why are you suddenly qualified to do that somewhere else? So I would say as Christians, we need to be a bit more humble and recognize that there's expertise out there that we need to draw on, and recognizing that, again, being well-intentioned is no substitute for being well-informed. And look, I was there. My plan, after my wife and I, we've got 6 children, 3 are our birth kids, 3 are local fostered and adopted children. And we thought, when we finished doing our work, trying to fix the UK care system, we'll retire somewhere hot and we'll run an orphanage because it's just an undeniable good. Think of the movie, the stage performance of Hamilton. It starts with, how can an orphan, son of a whatever, and then it ends with, I'm going to remember Hamilton's life, says his widow, by running an orphanage in your name. So it's an undeniable good, even in the most on-message, on-trend musical in the world, right? So no one questions it. So it's okay if you've been supporting an orphanage, if you've been on an orphanage tourism trip or a volunteer trip, I understand. I was in the same boat, but now we know we need to change.
Can you tell us a story, if you have a minute or two to tell us a story of, you've encountered so many kids, so many families. Do you have a story of a family that has been reunited, or an illustration in real life to tell us more about this?
Sure. There was a little boy that came into our care. It was an emergency foster placement. He had all sorts of eating disorders. He was very young. I think he was 9 months at the time. And we already had another baby, so it was like a foster baby. So it was like we had twins for a while. They were the same age, but they weren't related in any way. And boy, hats off to people that raise twins. That's a whole amazing challenge. Good, congratulations. We ought to wrap around you guys. And we loved on him, and he physically changed. He was very undernourished. His eyes were very sunken. And, just by normal practice of, doing family and regular food and sleep and baths and, you could see a physical change. It was just incredible. And the social workers did this amazing job. He'd been living with his mother, this little boy, and she had all sorts of trauma in her life that had turned into addictions. There were never kind of goodies and baddies in the care system. A lot of the parents who end up having their children removed have been victims themselves. Anyway, but she was deemed by the courts unable to be able to raise her son, and I think they were right. So they did a search, like who else is in this child's life? And they found out that his dad had been in the UK as a refugee, and then was rejected. Was an asylum seeker, rejected, sent back to another country, and they investigated what kind of parent is he. And they realised that he would actually be a pretty good parent. So they assessed him, brought him back to the UK. And then our job was to kind of mentor him. He'd never met his son. He'd never had an interaction with him. He didn't even know that. I don't even know if he knew there was a son in there. You know, it was a brief relationship. Anyway, so our job was to mentor this man to be able to raise his son. And it was such a healthy relationship. He was a lovely guy. Ended up getting a job and, you know, making a life for himself and for his son here in the UK. And he was a Muslim gentleman. Not, you know, nominal, I'd say, but it was an important part of his identity. And he said, "Oh, could you help me? I want to throw a party to celebrate my son coming home, and I haven't got anywhere to do it. Could we do it at your house?" And I said, "Yeah, that'd be fantastic." So he invited all his friends round. We had this huge celebration, and for foster parents, it's both the best of times and the worst of times, right? We love these children as their own. We saw that transformation, you know, really challenging. Unhealthy child growing into this beautiful boy. You know, we helped him to learn how to say his first words, make his first steps, and then we're handing him over. It was really tough. But on the other hand, what a joy to see a dad who didn't even know he had a son be reunited and be coached to become a parent, and now to live on and, you know, flourish with him. So fostering is an incredible privilege, and, you know, right now in Canada, there's a huge need for more foster carers in the system. Same in America, and between America and Canada, I think there's over 130,000 children who are in your care system that need adoption. You don't need to travel around the world like Madonna did in order to adopt a child from an orphanage where they have mums and dads already. But there are children in the Canadian system, in the American system, who currently need families. And so I would encourage people, if they want to make a difference, I can't think of a bigger difference you can make in a child's life than to provide them with a loving, caring, forever family.
People listening, I think a lot of people have thought about I think a lot of people broadly have thought maybe about fostering and adoption. It's something at least as an option on the table for Christians. It's sort of in the waters, but a lot of people don't actually do it. Um, what what do you think would be some indications of like the kind of people? I mean, other than like all people should do it. What do you think when you think of these? If you're this kind of person, like why aren't you already doing it? Do you have a few categories of people who you think just off the top they are going to be great foster parents?
Well, you'll be so amazed at the range of different foster parents I've met out there. I've met incredible single people who are fantastic foster parents and adoptive parents. And a lot of those single people say, I'd rather be doing this in a couple, but do you know what? I could still be a great parent for a child that needs me. I was speaking to a lady this morning who's a black single woman who has adopted 5 children, right? The oldest is 21, the youngest is 1. And she's
Wow.
done that because black children, both in the US and in the UK, are the least likely group to get adopted. And she thought, I don't think anyone should be left behind without having any parental figure in their lives. So I'm going to step up. So single people can be great adopters. Sometimes I meet people that say, oh, you know, I'd love to foster, but I would just love the children too much to give them up. And as a foster parent, I hear that as sometimes I'm in a bad mood and I hear that as a negative. You know, what are you saying? Those people that do fostering, they don't obviously love the children. They are, you know, they're just these heartless monsters that don't actually connect with the child. Or sometimes I'm really naughty and I say, wait, let me just question your definition of love. You're going to love this child so much that because you might possibly have some emotional pain, you're not going to get involved in this child's life at all. Let's just reboot what we mean by love. That is self-preservation, which is totally fine, but don't mistake that for love. Love is willing to be hurt in order that another might flourish. That's what Jesus did. That's why he died on the cross, right? He died on the cross. He experienced pain so that we might live. There you go, life in all its fullness. That's what Jesus came to do. So part of love is the power and the pain of sacrifice. That yes, it's going to hurt you when they leave, but it's worth it because you've given this child a really stable start in life. So don't count yourself out. You can get support. There are people around you that can help you through it. But don't say you'd love a child too much to give it up. That's not love, that's self-preservation.
In many ways, you have answered this question, but to be more direct about it. This idea of the fruit of the Spirit is goodness. There's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. The fruit of goodness. What does that mean to you when you think of that concept? And what then would be, a direct, a direct, action that people should take? What does it mean to have more goodness, or how do we acquire that in our life?
It's I love Galatians and I love the fruit of the Spirit. I see them as different aspects of the same entity. All those fruit are different aspects of the character of Jesus. That's all they are, aren't they? Who is the perfect personification of the fruit of the Spirit is Jesus. So we're all just kind of trying to become, in the power of the Spirit, more Jesus-like. And so as we do that, the outworking will be patience, kindness, goodness, self-control, all of those. And you almost can't disentangle them. They're like a Jenga block. You say, well, I'll pick some of them. I'll do the goodness bit, but I won't do the patience bit. That doesn't work. The whole thing falls down. You need all of those fruit in the Spirit in order to be productive, fruitful, faithful as a Christian. So I think my feeling is, as a Christian, I want to be available to God. That's part of recognizing that Jesus is not just my Savior, but He's my Lord, and He directs me, and He opens up opportunities for us to serve Him. And, sometimes it's just having the eyes to see them. Check out what the local statistics are in your community for fostering and adoption. Check out what the stats are in your area for how many homeless people have been in the care system and just failed to ever find a forever family. How many of your prison population, how many of the trafficked young women, or how many of the sex workers are young people that have aged out of care, never receiving that ongoing family? And then ask yourself, well, is it possible that my family could do this? If it's not at that moment, that's okay. But what else can we be doing to provide these groups of people that have fallen through the cracks of the system the love and support they need? And I think opportunities will open up, and you'll be having more opportunities to do good than you'll actually be able to fulfill.
Krish, thank you so much for your time. This challenge to us, I think you've done both. You did speak to our heart, but you spoke to our head. So thank you. Where do people find you? If people want to see your work, find your books, where do you want to
Yeah,
send
well,
people?
I'm addicted to social media because I'm an extrovert, so I'm easy to find. To quote a song by The National, at Krish K, Krishk is Twitter, and Twitter is my favorite social media space. I try to do Instagram, but I'm not very good at it. So at Krish K if you're on Twitter. Otherwise, just Google my name, Krish Kandiah. I've got a website. People can be in touch that way.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure. It's good to see you.